What's going on, YouTube? Culturedog Sam Hatch back here with more 80s Mania. This list is huge. It's getting, the list of lists is getting bigger and bigger. Thanks for everybody for chiming in and talking on the first four videos that dropped. It was a good time. And I didn't really properly explain my criteria for coming up with these lists, but as a fan of lists in general, just reading magazines and other film critics lists and stuff like that, you have to come up with some sort of structure in your mind of what you're doing. And I had mentioned before it was rudimentary, and it is basically because it's more gut feeling. But then there is the mixture of criteria that I'm mixing in. Generally, I'm trying to stick to a rule of one film per director in a list, because otherwise it will all be John Carpenter movies. Yeah, that's just how it goes. Generally. And then the others are basically it's impact over quality. Quality as in terms of generally accepted cinematic quality. So if I don't have all these classics on here, it's because those classics did not impact me very much in the 80s, or if they did, I discovered them later. And I'm not completely omitting films that I didn't discover until the 90s or a little bit later, but if there's something else that impacted me more, it wins by default. So, all right, case in point, Pete 1972 mentioned in the crime thrillers that I didn't have Thief on my list, and Thief was obviously on my roster, but the first factor is that I didn't even know it existed in the 80s. Thief, I thought The Keep was Michael Mann's first movie. I didn't learn of Thief's existence until the 90s, and probably maybe when the Laserdisc came out. But then I still didn't see Thief until the 2000s. So then you have Manhunter, which was also on my list, which not only did I know about it in the 80s, I was aware of it, and it impacted me much more. I mean, I became a huger fan of it in the 90s, early 2000s, etc. But its impact was present in the 80s, and it had a huge impact on me as a film watcher. But that beat Thief altogether in terms of time and impact. So I didn't even have to get into a situation where I had to evaluate which is theoretically the better film. And Thief is fantastic. You should check it out if you get a chance. It's a proto-Heat, and James Caan is it's amazing. I mean, Frank is the coolest guy ever. And I love the fact that Michael Mann taught James Caan pretty much how to become a thief in order to make the film. Typical Michael Mann. So yeah, get that Criterion Blu-ray, or get the Laserdisc, which is down there somewhere. I'd pull it out and show you, but it's so far away. Anyways, so that was one instance. Then my other buddy Max reached out and mentioned, your dramas list didn't have things like Last Emperor and The Color Purple, etc. in it. And I was surprised. And then my answer to that was that those movies didn't impact me in the 80s. I knew of their existence, but I didn't see Color Purple theatrically. I don't think I even saw it on cable at the time. And Last Emperor I was a little more interested in when it came out, because that was maybe 87, something like that. So I was definitely interested in it, and I've mentioned before about how I was into Wings of Oniamiz because of the Ryuichi Sakamoto score, and I knew he did work on Last Emperor and the David Byrne thing. So I think I was more keen on the soundtrack of The Last Emperor than the film itself. But yeah, that was a movie that didn't really connect with me until the 90s. So there were plenty of other movies that were on the list that therefore won by default. So there's this kind of scale of importance of things, and it may make absolutely no sense. So anyways, not to waste the first 5 minutes of this video just talking about the madness to my method, but again, my modus operandi has always been to kind of celebrate impact over quality anyways, because there are films that people will say, well, they're objectively bad, they don't meet the criteria for an important film that would win an Academy Award. And my argument has always been, who cares? I was talking with my buddy Max about the dramas, and I was thinking about the time I was on this radio show. We were doing a top. Well, it was just a list of John Carpenter's filmography, like ranked. Basically, we were just going through the whole thing and kind of doing maybe a top 20 or something like that. But in any case, we both agreed on the fact that The Thing was his best film, but it wasn't our favorite of his. So there's that dynamic at play. Whereas Citizen Kane can be the best film of all time, and everyone can agree on that. But I'm not taking it to a desert island with me. I'm taking Big Trouble in Little China to a desert island with me, and films like Vertigo. So occasionally my list will cross over with those like important critics lists, but it's because it's honest. It's because that film genuinely impacted me in a truthful, like soulful way, and not just because I'm trying to front and show off, because it's like, I love this film called La Tour de Dive. It was made by the immaculate Toby Volk in his simmering period. All that's out the window. Did it punch me in the gut? Did Firstborn scare the crap out of me because Peter Weller was terrifying and destroyed Terry Gard, turned her into a drug addict? Yes, that is what happened. So that's the facts, Jack. This is how this list is constructed. But yeah, there's probably going to be plenty more questions as it rolls on, because you're going to be like, why did you leave X off the list? And there's usually some sort of reason, and it might be convoluted, but there is a reason. And chances are, if your beloved film is off the list, it's on mine. I've got an Excel spreadsheet that goes from 10 to 20 and beyond in some cases. The horror list is redonkulous. It just keeps running down for eternity. So chances are it is on my list, but it didn't make the top 10 for some sort of reason. But the plus side, there's so many damn choices that I can easily revisit this in some time and do a Revenge of the 80s list and do like the 11 through 20 roster and just pimp that as a fresh top 10. And I don't know, we'll get there when we get there. Anyways, enough of my talking. Let's get to me talking about the top 10 cult indie films. They could be independent. They could have some major financing behind them, and they just became, sleepers at the box office that were discovered by cable audiences or VHS audiences later. Any mixture therein. Whatever. Yeah, like I said, I like to play it fast and loose with this list, while also being structured and detailed. I don't know. Who cares? Number 10 is Cherry 2000. And that was a movie I was not aware of its inception. I didn't hear much buzz about it. I probably maybe read about it in some of the genre mags I was reading at the time. But it was one of those moments I savor the most. It's that you're up late, cable's on, and some movie's about to start that you really don't care about, and then you get sucked in almost immediately. And Cherry 2000 was, akin to a ton of other cheap sci-fi staples that you would find on VHS and cable, B-movie level, but it had like so much more kind of heart to it and spirit to it. And much later I discovered Michael Amareda did the script, which probably explains things, because I was a fan of his film Nadia and his remake of Hamlet with Ethan Hawke. And he also did like uncredited work on Total Recall, and he did a draft of Until the End of the World, which is another film that had almost the exact same impact on me in the 90s. Wim Wenders' film, which is, there should be a director's cut available in the States maybe someday, because it's like in truncated form here. But it's got a similar kind of road movie vibe, and it's vaguely science fiction. But anyways, Cherry 2000 had David Andrews as a gentleman who has a beloved robot companion, Cherry 2000, who goes on the fritz. And Pamela Gidley played the robot, and he's, in love with his robot. It's, a very Blade Runner 2049-esque situation, but, from the 80s. And he goes on this road mission because he's got her personality on the go, much like Blade Runner 2049, but he wants to implant it into a new replacement model of the robot. And along the way, he gets involved with this Mad Maxine-esque tracker, played by Melanie Griffith, who is, a real girl. And there's that whole, dynamic, very much like in Blade Runner 2049. I don't know if I've said that enough, of, loving a real girl versus a fake girl, and he's going to go on this mission to find a new one. And along the way, they meet, Harry Carey Jr., and then, of course, the great Tim Thomerson has to be in there, because, you got to have Tim Thomerson in a film like this. But it's just got a lot of spirit, a lot of fun. It's not the best written film or anything like that, but I loved it. Yeah, I got hooked on it pretty quickly, and it became, in my top 20 of like all-time list at the time, pretty quickly. So Cherry 2000, it seems to have picked up a pretty sizable cult audience over the years, and it's, pretty widely available on home video. So if you haven't seen it, maybe take it for a spin. Number 9 is a film that was a Laserdisc staple for the longest time. One of those films that was available on VHS and Laserdisc, but wasn't available on DVD and Blu-ray until recently. Shout Factory had to go and ruin that by putting out a nice Blu-ray copy of it. And it is a Penelope Spheres film called Dudes. And Dudes is, bonkers. It's delicious. It's got Daniel Roebuck and John Cryer as punks from New York City, and Flea also in there as well, as punks from New York City that decide they're going to move out to California and just go on this crazy road trip. And, the world is their oyster until they realize that they have to share that oyster with a bunch of other psychos, including Lee Ving from the band Fear and from films like Get Crazy and Flashdance, etc. And his crew of just, roving psychos. And it takes a dark turn. That's the film is tonally all over the place. It's funny at key moments. It's almost like a horror thriller in some moments, and then it's this rousing action adventure at some points, and it gets crazier and wackier. And there's like some spiritual elements to it. It's got a character named Daredelvis, who's a Elvis Daredevil. I mean, how do you not love Daredelvis? Mary Catherine Stewart shows up in there as well. Interesting supporting cast, interesting film. It's just one of those strange little entities. And it's, kind of got some Hills of Eyes elements in it where the hunted become the hunters and then become even, kind of crazier and more out there than the original killers were in the first place. And so I caught that on cable because, if I remember the story correctly, I skipped school to go see Star Trek V with my friends, and I borrowed the Plymouth Satellite, which was the family car at the time. That was probably before we got the Camaro, and I think my dad's car was in the shop or something, so I actually had to drive my mom to work and then pick her up after, and I screwed up and got there too late because I had to drop off all my friends individually after skipping school and going to see Star Trek V, which was not worth it. Obviously, stay in school, kids, because if you leave school, you're going to see Star Trek V. And somewhere along the way, my mom figured out, my machinations, and then grounded me from going to see my girlfriend that evening. So what else are you going to do? I'm sure it was Friday night. Stay home, watch cable. So I ended up seeing Dudes. So something good came out of that situation. I didn't get any action, but I got to see Dudes. So number 9, Dudes. I still love it too. It's awesome. Number 8 is a film we covered on the Laser Discotheque podcast. If you want to learn more about it, you should check that out. Sadly, there's only 10 episodes, 11 episodes, but it's on one of the later ones. It's Heathers, a dark, satirical comedy from the late 80s, and Winona Ryder and Christian Slater are just completely bonkers, and it's fantastic. And it's this tale of these super popular girls in a high school arena, and Winona Ryder is someone that falls into their circles, and then Christian Slater comes in as this almost Tyler Durden-esque character with his burn it all down mission, and suicide stagings and all sorts of other bad ideas get involved. And he's pretty much a homicidal maniac, but he's got so much charm and wit and is a fascinating character that you still have to watch him. And it's really it's a kind of Fight Club-esque film, but with Winona Ryder and the Edward Norton kind of role determining her life and kind of figuring it out and where she sides, and still holds up. It's been remade and reworked and pulled left and right, but check out the original, Heathers. Number 7 is probably cheating because I don't think this screened theatrically. If it did, it was probably like a LA only affair, but I still count it as a film, and it impacted my life and my friends' lives so much because we watched it over and over and over and over and over again, and kind of fooled ourselves into thinking we were part of it in some way. That is the Third Bones Brigade film, The Search for Animal Chen. And if you are outside of the skating kind of realm, out of that scene, this will probably not be your cup of tea. But it was a series of videos that Stacy Peralta, who was the half of Powell Peralta, the skateboard company, he was a 70s freestyle skater. That was more his bag. and but he was getting involved in video production and trying to work out new angles at expressing the nature of skateboarding in different mediums. And this series, the Bones Brigade series, started off and it kept getting bigger and bigger. The second one had like some other wacky stuff and introduced this lounge singer character, Johnny Rad. And this one brought it up to another crazier level. It's a bunch of different skate scenes, scattered throughout the states, kind of tied together with the story of this legendary old wise teacher named Animal Chen who's gone missing, and all these skaters are kind of following his path and learning his ancient lore along the way. And reintroduces Johnny Rad and his lounge band and really good stuff, and all these other kind of side characters along the way. They go and hang out with different crews and different skate parks. They go to Wallows, which is this amazing aqueduct system that's pretty cracked and gnarly. So there's a lot of danger, and then of course it's got some so there's like a little dream sequence where all the crashes and spectacular fails are on display. But a lot of it's driven by the charisma of the Bones Brigade, which was Lance Mountain, Steve Caballero, Tommy Guerrero, Mike McGill, Tony Hawk, and then a lot of other kind of Bones Brigade also rans, or not really also rans, but sub main brigade crew in there as well. So a ton of people that you would recognize if you're into skateboarding, etc. But and the whole thing kind of culminates in this discovery of a giant half pipe built by the gods out in the middle of the desert, and some fabulous photography. And it's funny because my wife makes fun of me when I watch a lot of old skate videos, because it's before kick flips were invented. It's before a lot of stuff happened. She's like, wow, this is pretty dull. But there's some great footage in Animal Chin. And some of my favorite stuff is just like them like rolling a little tiny ramp on a skateboard like up a hill and putting it in a basketball court or something, like riding up walls and fun things like that. So there's a lot to love about the search for Animal Chin. And you had to have a cool Animal Chin t-shirt with the Have You Seen Him logo on it. That was like the thing back in the day. Anyways, I talked way too much about it, but it's probably the film everyone's seen the least, so now you know a little bit more about Bones Brigade Video Volume 3, The Search for Animal Chin. At number 7. Number 6, we're going with early Coen Brothers, Blood Simple, which, again, there was no buzz about the Coen Brothers when I caught it on cable, because it was just some new, dark, independent drama film that was going on. And it's just largely a small town Texas cat and mouse game between people hiring other people to do things and them not doing it the way they think, and then this kind of spiraling out of control. And its DNA is definitely present in later films like Fargo, etc. But Frances McDormand and M. Emmett Walsh are the key elements of this film. And it was just so snaky and interesting when it came out that it just jumped out from a lot of its peers. And Blood Simple. It was reissued in the 90s in a different cut, a different variation. I'm trying to remember if I think there is a bare bones 4:3 Laserdisc available of the theatrical cut. I'll have to pick that up at some point. But anyways, Blood Simple. Awesome flick. Number 5. Holy crap. All right, so this is one of the ones where I cheat because I didn't technically see this film until the 90s. But when I did, its impact reached all the way back into the 80s, like Tendrils of Doom. And it is Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. Michael Rooker is amazing in the film, and it is so grimy, and it's shot so, I've seen other low-budget films or something, but something about the griminess, the relatively, obscure actors in the film, and just the way it was handled, that it felt like a documentary, even though mentally while you're watching the film that you're conscious of the fact that this is all actors acting out a film, but it's almost more real than a documentary. The results are just so visceral, and it's hard to shake off the stink of this film. It is, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer is unforgettable, unseeable, and you'll definitely need to take a shower after it. But I love it. I also love the cover that Fantomas did of the theme song on their director's cut album. Check that out. Number 4, we're going with something relatively big, but it was an independent film at heart, and that is James Cameron's The Terminator. You'll notice too that there's a lot of films on here that could also be on the sci-fi and horror list. That may be a clue that there's just so many damn good sci-fi and horror things that I needed to find a place for these films to go because they were so important, but yeah, they didn't fit into those lists for whatever reason. But yeah, The Terminator, I saw that multiple times in the cinemas, but as much of a over-the-top fun action movie as it is, there's also like a real dark heart at the core of The Terminator, and that movie freaked me out as much as it did thrill me when it came out. The whole kind of like clouds of fate and the uncertainty of the future, and the pall of nuclear doom hanging over everything we did in the 80s was it was palpable, and Terminator exploited that. Pretty much every day, like no matter how much fun and how many Ray-Bans you were wearing and how much flock of seagulls you were blaring, you were still like Sarah Connor driving off in that Jeep into that stormy horizon. That was like our everyday existence in the 80s, wondering when we were all going to die from nuclear destruction. So yeah, that was a little kind of weird, stinky nugget at the heart of The Terminator. So it's a real interesting film for me because it's so 80s. It's so fantastic, and it's got a club called Tech Noir, which is the coolest. And Arnold Schwarzenegger just crushing it, Michael Biehn crushing it, Linda Hamilton crushing it, and Lance Henriksen crushing it, Paul Winfield crushing it. Killer cast, and James Cameron just showed everybody how you do, basically, how you can make things work with a low budget, and he inspired tons of filmmakers to not just make straight to video B-movie crap, like do the best job you can at it. And he did, and now we're here, and there's no new James Cameron movie. What the hell, James? Make some movies. I know you're doing your Avatar 4 through 12, but whatever. But thanks for making The Terminator. Number 4. Number 3, I did see it theatrically, but not in its initial run, sadly. I had to catch it at an art house repertory theater in the 90s, but I did see it on cable for the first time in the 80s, and that is Blue Velvet, a very interesting David Lynch film that definitely bridges the gap between his earlier work, specifically Eraserhead, and the later like Twin Peaks and Wild at Heart kind of vibe, etc. And brings back Colin McLaughlin, who Lynch had worked with in Dune previously, but it gets Angelo Badalamenti into the mix, it gets Julie Cruz into the mix, and it's really where the David Lynch formula kind of congealed and solidified, much like Evil Bob. And so many amazing, bizarre moments, so many comical moments, dark moments. I was just talking about, there's a lot of films on this list that meet these criteria of like Dune and Terminator, that not Dune, Dudes and Terminator, that they have these kind of fun moments, comical moments, but also these very dark moments. It seems true of a lot of these kind of cult films, is that tonally they have these different styles all kind of working concurrently, from comedy to dark drama and almost bits of horror, etc. And Frank Booth is terrifying in this film. You got to hand it to Dennis Hopper. Isabella Rossellini is fantastic as well. And Blue Velvet. Check out their most recent Criterion Collection Blu-ray if you haven't seen it before. And get ready and stay off Lincoln Street. Number 2 is a film that I didn't see theatrically, but that doesn't matter because it's almost better that I saw it on VHS for the first time. And, well, it would have been even better if it was Betamax, because it is David Cronenberg's Videodrome. And that, I was aware of Cronenberg's stuff, specifically Scanners, before this. I don't know, I probably had heard about some of his other stuff, but Scanners was one that, like, my dad went to go see and talked about, and everybody was psyched about, because exploding heads and mental powers is something you don't clearly forget. But Videodrome was like my immersion into the whole world of Cronenberg, seriously, for the first time. And come on, Max Wren is the coolest guy ever, and just discovering all these mysteries about videotape and home video and all this stuff. I mean, it's like we were all discovering these mysteries about videotape and home video at the time. So it was very easy to tap into the world of Max Wren. And James Woods is fantastic, and Debbie Harry is fantastic, and so many of the kind of Cronenberg bits of wordplay with character names are in here, and the body horror elements and the mutation of the flesh and all sorts of grody bits of disturbing imagery in there. Its impact on other indie and cult film directors was, undeniable. Videodrome is amazing. Long live the new flesh. And number one, again, I don't think I've ever seen this in a cinema, but it was I saw it on cable, taped it, and would blast the VHS cassette in mono, because before I had a hi-fi VCR, through my mom's old Technics receiver, so I could hear the soundtrack blaring while I was jamming to the film. It's Repo Man, Alex Cox's sci-fi, comedy, what have you, alien caper. It's like, what if you mix a bunch of like Area 51, alien conspiracy action with just car repossession guys, dudes that are in the streets and kind of know the ins and outs of LA. So it's the celebration of street level Los Angeles, while also injecting all of these interesting and wacky, fun science fiction elements into the film. And then mixing in the fact that it's also got Emilio Estevez as main character, who's tapped into the hardcore punk scene of the early 80s in Los Angeles, has that kind of hardcore punk icing on the cake. The soundtrack alone is worth the price of admission. You've got Suicidal Tendencies, you got The Plugs, Cruzados, you got Black Flag, TV Parties on there. I mean, what's not to love? Circle Jerks doing a little acoustic version of When the Shit Hits the Fan. Pablo Picasso was such a killer song. So many great songs on there. All over the map. Killer Spanish cover of Secret Agent Man. You got to get the soundtrack and get the film. And there were some versions that had both. There was a nice Anchor Bay DVD that had the soundtrack CD and the DVD, and I got the tin case with the California license plate. Repo Man. Otto was the coolest dude, and the movie is just fun and insane and eminently quotable. Tracy Walters quotes in particular. Harry Dean Stanton's got some killer quotes in the film, and it was like nothing else at the time. So that's Repo Man, number one, the finale of our top 10 80s list of cult/indie films. Hopefully you enjoyed the list, and again, drop your comments below whether or not you've seen these films, loved them, hated them, or you have a bunch of other alternate titles you want to represent. Now's your time to do it. I'll chat with you guys in a bit. Cheers.